If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. In a wealthy suburb of New York City, perched on one of the most valuable hills in Westchester County, stood a residence that looked like it had been lifted from the pages of an architectural magazine. Immaculate white walls, expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, gardens designed by renowned landscape artists, where every plant was placed with millimeter precision, and an infinity pool that reflected the New York sky in shades of gray and blue. Everything about it breathed success, achievement, and power. The furniture was imported, the art on the walls came from European galleries, and even the simplest details, like the doorknobs, had been chosen with obsessive care. But anyone who knew the house from the inside knew that the gleam of its surfaces concealed a heavy silence, an old sadness that seeped through the hallways like a persistent shadow. It was a house where appearances mattered more than feelings, where luxury couldn't warm the cold that inhabited every room. Robert Miller was the owner of that fortress of concrete and glass. At 43, he ran one of the largest development firms in the country, Miller and Associates, a company he had founded himself 20 years earlier, starting with small home renovations and eventually erecting skyscrapers that reshaped the city's skyline. Commercial buildings in Midtown Manhattan, luxury condos on the Upper East Side, and corporate towers in the financial district. His name was synonymous with realized ambition, with someone who had turned sweat into an empire. Business magazines loved to tell his story. The poor boy from a small town in rural Pennsylvania who arrived in New York with a single suitcase of worn-out clothes and a dream, too big to contain. He studied civil engineering, working during the day and attending classes at night, sleeping 4 hours a day for years. He graduated at the top of his class, landed a job at a respectable construction firm, learned all the secrets of the trade, and when he felt he was ready, he struck out on his own to build his own path. But Robert carried a weight on his shoulders that no amount of money could alleviate. 3 years ago, he had lost Beatrice, the great love of his life, under circumstances he preferred not to revisit. She had passed suddenly, unexpectedly, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. The pain of that loss had transformed him completely. Where there was once lightness, now there was only a defensive hardness. Where there were once spontaneous laughs, now there were only calculated, diplomatic, empty smiles. Robert threw himself into work like a drowning man, letting endless meetings and constant travel fill the emptiness Beatrice had left behind. He thought that if he kept his mind busy, if he never stopped to feel, maybe the pain would lessen, but it didn't. It just morphed into something chronic, something he carried like a phantom limb that still aches even though it's no longer there. From his union with Beatrice, Sophia was born, a little girl with large, deep brown eyes, just like her mother's, and equally brown hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders. At 6 years old, Sophia still held on to the memory of her mother like a fragile treasure, something too precious to be touched, but impossible to forget. Sophia was a quiet, delicate, almost invisible child. She had a habit of making herself small, of taking up as little space as possible, as if she were afraid of being a bother. She would spend hours sitting in the corner of her room, hugging a worn-out teddy bear, light brown with one ear slightly bent and its embroidered nose almost faded away. It was the last gift she had received from her mother, given just days before the final goodbye. Beatrice had bought the bear at an artisanal toy shop in Greenwich Village, saying it would take care of Sophia whenever she felt lonely. And Sophia took those words to heart. The bear never left her side. She slept with it, ate with it in her lap, and carried it everywhere. Sophia didn't talk much. She didn't run through the hallways like other children would. She didn't laugh out loud. She didn't throw tantrums. She didn't ask for things. It was as if she had learned, very early on, that taking up space was dangerous, that drawing attention could bring bad consequences. She observed everything with those big eyes, always watchful, always scared, always expecting the worst. At school, her teachers said she was an exemplary student, quiet, obedient, always completing her assignments, but they also said she didn't play during recess. She would sit, alone in a corner of the playground, hugging her teddy bear, watching the other children run and scream as if it were something from another world, something she wasn't allowed to participate in. The school counselors had called Robert a few times for a meeting. They said Sophia needed support, that she was showing signs of social isolation, that it might be good to seek professional help. Robert always promised he would do something, but he never did. He was always too busy, always had some urgent contract to close, some trip that was impossible to cancel. 2 years after Beatrice's passing, Robert met Marcella at a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. It was an event to raise funds for a cancer research foundation, and Robert had been invited as one of the main donors. He was there more out of social obligation than personal desire, dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne he barely touched, observing the crowd of smiling faces with a kind of profound weariness. That's when she appeared. Marcella was stunning, platinum blonde, tall, around 5'9", always dressed in designer clothes that seemed to have been made specifically for her body. That night she wore a long gold satin gown that captured all the light in the ballroom, jewels that sparkled under the immense chandeliers, and sky-high heels that made her steps look like a choreographed dance. Marcella had a perfect smile, the kind that looks like it's been rehearsed 1,000 times in front of a mirror, an impeccable posture that came from years of attending such events, and an impressive ability to move among the powerful with ease. She knew exactly what to say, when to smile, how to tilt her head to show interest, how to lightly touch someone's arm to create instant intimacy. Marcella worked as a PR executive for a French luxury brand, organizing events, managing the company's image, and connecting influential people. She was good at what she did, very good. She knew all the codes of that world of appearances, knew how to navigate the invisible hierarchies, and understood that in that universe, being seen was more important than being genuine. When she noticed Robert Miller, alone, with the air of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, she saw an opportunity. She approached him naturally, commented on the beauty of the event, and asked a few questions about his development firm. Robert, used to empty conversations, answered mechanically, but Marcella was persistent. She had a way of making people feel special, of making them believe she truly cared. And Robert, still reeling from the loss of Beatrice, saw in her a chance for a new beginning. It wasn't love. He knew that from the start. He didn't feel for Marcella even a fraction of what he had felt for Beatrice. But it was companionship. It was someone who smiled at him, who didn't look at him with pity, who didn't treat his widower status as a permanent tragedy. It was a chance to build something new, to not be forever stuck in the past, to try to move forward even if the path seemed foggy. They started seeing each other. Dinners at sophisticated restaurants, social events, weekend trips to resorts on the coast. Marcella was always impeccable, always cheerful, always ready with a smile. She didn't demand emotional presence. She didn't ask deep questions. She didn't try to understand his pain. And in a way, Robert appreciated that. It was easier to be with someone who didn't require vulnerability. They married a year later, in a discreet but elegant ceremony at a rustic chic estate in the Hudson Valley. It was one of those places featured in wedding magazines, green fields stretching as far as the eye could see, a rustic wooden chapel, tables decorated with wildflower arrangements, and lights strung through ancient trees. The wedding was small, just close family and intimate friends. Robert didn't want a grand affair. He still carried the memory of his first wedding, that one filled with genuine joy and meaningful promises. This second wedding was different. It was more procedural, more formal. The pastor's words seemed to echo in an emotional void. Sophia was there, dressed in a white lace dress that Marcella had chosen. It was a beautiful dress, true but uncomfortable. The lace scratched Sophia's sensitive skin, and the bow was tied too tightly around her waist. She held her teddy bear in one hand and nervously clutched the folds of the dress with the other. She watched everything with frightened eyes, trying to understand what was happening. Teresa, who was also there, noticed the girl's expression and felt her heart ache. Sophia didn't quite understand why a strange woman was now wearing the white dress that should be reserved for special moments. She didn't understand why her father was smiling at that woman the same way he used to smile at her mother in old photos. She only knew that something was changing, and change always scared her. During the ceremony, Sophia sat next to Teresa in the front row, quiet as always. When the pastor asked the bride and groom to kiss, she looked away. When everyone applauded, she just sat there, motionless. Teresa noticed and put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "It's okay, my flower," she whispered. "Your daddy still loves you very much." But Sophia wasn't so sure. It seemed like every day he was more distant, more busy, more absent. After the ceremony, there was an outdoor dinner. The guests ate, drank, laughed, and told stories. Robert circulated among the tables, greeting people, thanking them for coming. Marcella was radiant, posing for photos, showing off her ring, smiling non-stop. Sophia sat next to Teresa all night, eating little and speaking even less. At one point, a distant aunt tried to make conversation. "So, Sophia, are you happy with your new mommy?" Sophia looked at the woman, confused. Marcella wasn't her mommy. She never would be. She didn't answer. She just hugged her teddy bear tighter and wished she could disappear. From the beginning, the relationship between Marcella and Sophia was icy. Marcella never showed genuine affection for the girl. To her, Sophia was an inconvenient reminder of Robert's past, a presence that disrupted the perfect image she wanted to build. Marcella wanted to be seen as the wife of a successful businessman, to shine at social events, to have her home be an impeccable backdrop for her social media photos. Her shy, silent, and constantly sad child didn't fit the narrative she was trying to sell. In the first few months, Marcella still pretended. She would smile at Sophia when Robert was around, compliment the girl's hair, suggest trips to the mall, but as soon as Robert left for work, the mask would fall. The smile would vanish. The tone of her voice would change. Marcella didn't yell. She didn't have to. She simply ignored Sophia as if the girl were part of the furniture. When Sophia tried to show her a drawing she had made at school, Marcella would glance at it and mutter a cold comment before turning her attention back to her phone. When Sophia asked a question, Marcella would answer with monosyllables without looking up. The rejection didn't need to be explicit to be devastating. The house had a housekeeper named Teresa, a middle-aged woman who had worked for the family since before Beatrice passed away. Teresa had known Sophia since she was a baby. She watched the girl wither emotionally day after day. She noticed the increasingly dull look in her eyes, the way Sophia would shrink when Marcella entered a room, the way the child avoided speaking during meals. Teresa tried to compensate. She cooked Sophia's favorite dishes, sat with her while she did her homework, and made up stories before bedtime. But Teresa was just an employee. She had no authority to confront her boss, and Robert, always absent, didn't see what was happening. Weeks turned into months. Robert traveled more and more. Washington, D.C., Chicago, Boston, sometimes even overseas. When he was home, he arrived late, exhausted, and found Marcella always impeccable, always smiling. She would greet him with a kiss on the cheek and news about social events she had organized or attended. Robert would ask about Sophia, and Marcella would reply with rehearsed ease. "She's fine. She ate well, did her homework, she's sleeping." Robert would go up to his daughter's room, watch her sleep for a few minutes, adjust her blanket, and leave. He didn't realize that Sophia only fell asleep after crying silently. He didn't see the dark circles that were starting to form under her eyes. He didn't notice how she was becoming more and more withdrawn. One evening, Marcella hosted a charity dinner at their home. The house was filled with important guests, business leaders, politicians, local celebrities. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and sophisticated appetizers. A hired pianist played soft music in the background. Marcella was the perfect hostess, moving between groups with elegance, smiling for the cameras, posing for photos. Robert stood by her side, playing his social role but visibly tired. Sophia was instructed to make a brief appearance, greet a few guests, and then go up to her room. Marcella made it clear she didn't want the girl wandering around the party, interrupting adult conversations. Sophia came down the stairs slowly, holding the railing tightly. She was wearing a light pink dress that Marcella had chosen, but it was uncomfortable and too tight. A few guests commented on how pretty she was and asked questions that Sophia answered in a low, almost inaudible voice. Marcella watched from a distance, with a tense smile. As soon as she could, she dismissed Sophia with a subtle nod of her head. The girl ran up to her room, relieved to be away from the suffocating atmosphere. She locked the door, took off the uncomfortable dress, put on her pajamas, and hugged her teddy bear. From downstairs she could hear laughter, lively conversations, and music. Sophia curled up in bed and covered her ears. She wanted it all to end. She wanted her mother to come back. She wanted her father to really look at her, not just in passing. Teresa came up with a plate of food. She knocked softly on the door and entered. She sat next to Sophia on the bed and stroked her hair. "Come on, my flower. You need to eat something." Sophia shook her head. She wasn't hungry. Teresa insisted gently, managing to get her to eat a few spoonfuls of rice. She stayed there until Sophia fell asleep. The teddy bear clutched to her chest. Downstairs, the party continued late into the night. When the last guests finally left, Marcella came up to the bedroom, still euphoric, commenting on how perfect everything had been. Robert just agreed, exhausted, and soon fell asleep. The following days were particularly difficult. Robert had to travel to Washington, D.C. for an important week-long meeting. Before leaving, he said goodbye to Sophia with a kiss on her forehead. "Daddy's going on a trip, but I'll be back soon, okay? You stay with Marcella and Teresa. Be good, you hear?" Sophia just nodded. She knew what that trip meant. It meant being left alone with Marcella without any protection. As soon as Robert left, the atmosphere in the house changed. Marcella, free from the need to keep up appearances, became even colder. She started giving Sophia orders in an authoritarian tone. The girl had a strict schedule for everything: breakfast, bath, homework, dinner. Any small deviation was met with cutting remarks. Marcella began insisting that Sophia practice the piano, an instrument she herself had never shown interest in. She said a girl of their social standing needed to have refined skills. Sophia would sit at the piano with trembling hands, trying to follow Marcella's cold instructions. When she made a mistake, which happened often, Marcella would sigh loudly, roll her eyes, and make comments about how clumsy she was. Teresa watched it all with a heavy heart. She tried to intervene a few times, suggesting that the girl needed patience, that learning piano takes time. Marcella would cut her off with an icy glare. "Teresa, you're here to cook and clean, not to give your opinion on her upbringing." Teresa would back down powerless. On the third day of Robert's trip, Sophia woke up, feeling sick. She had a fever and her body ached. Teresa noticed immediately and told Marcella. The response was an irritated sigh. Marcella didn't like unforeseen events. She said it was just a simple flu, that Sophia should take some medicine and rest. But she didn't go up to see the girl. She didn't bring her water, didn't adjust her blanket, didn't place a hand on her forehead to check her temperature. It was Teresa who took care of everything. Sophia spent 2 days in bed, feverish and scared. Teresa stayed by her side whenever she could, but she had other chores to do in the house. When Sophia would call out softly, asking for water or if her mommy was back yet, Teresa's heart would break. She knew Sophia was confused, mixing up the present and the past, reality and memory. Fevers sometimes do that to children. When Robert called to check in, Marcella answered in a calm voice, "Everything's fine. Sophia had a little flu, but she's already getting better. Nothing serious." Robert, relieved, thanked her and hung up. He trusted his wife. He had no reason to doubt her. On the 5th day, Sophia got better. The fever broke. She started leaving her room again, still weak but a little better. Marcella watched the girl come down the stairs with indifference and turned her attention back to her phone. She was planning another party, this time at an exclusive club in Westchester. She needed to confirm the guest list, choose the right dress, and make sure everything was photographed from the right angles. Sophia sat on the living room sofa, holding her teddy bear, and looked out the window. Outside, the New York sky was grey and heavy, as if it could rain at any moment. She wished her father would come back soon. She wished someone would really see her. She wished she didn't feel so invisible. Teresa brought her a glass of orange juice and sat beside her. She put her arm around the girl's thin shoulders and pulled her close. Sophia rested her head on Teresa's shoulder and closed her eyes. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about anything. She just felt the relief of being close to someone who truly cared. But Teresa knew it wasn't enough. She needed to talk to Robert. She needed to tell him what was happening, but how? If Marcella found out, she could be fired, and then who would take care of Sophia? Teresa was trapped in an impossible dilemma. She did what she could, protected the girl as best she could, but she knew it wasn't enough. Robert returned from DC on Saturday night, carrying a heavy briefcase and the tired expression of someone who had spent days in grueling meetings. Marcella greeted him with a radiant smile, already dressed to go out. She had booked a table at a trendy restaurant in Soho and invited some friends. Robert hesitated, saying he was exhausted, but Marcella insisted. They needed to make an appearance, maintain their social connections. He gave in, as always. Before leaving, Robert went up to Sophia's room. The girl was sitting on her bed, drawing. When she saw her father, her eyes lit up for a moment. Robert sat beside her and asked how her week had been. Sophia hesitated. She wanted to say so many things. She wanted to tell him about the fever, the piano lessons, the fear she felt. But the words wouldn't come out. She just said everything was fine. Robert smiled, relieved, and ruffled her hair. "Daddy's going out now, but tomorrow we'll spend the day together, okay? I promise." Sophia nodded. She had heard promises like that before. Robert went downstairs, put on a jacket, and left with Marcella. The car disappeared through the gate, taking with it Sophia's last hope that someone would finally notice what was happening. Teresa went up to the room again. She sat next to Sophia, who was still holding a colored pencil. On the paper was a strange drawing, a huge dark house with closed windows. In the bottom corner, a small lonely figure stared into nothingness. "What did you draw, my love?" Sophia didn't answer. She just kept coloring, filling the sky with shades of grey. Teresa felt a tightness in her chest. She knew something had to be done, but she didn't know how. Not yet. The days dragged on. Robert returned to his frantic work routine. Marcella continued organizing events, attending parties, and cultivating her flawless image. And Sophia, growing quieter and more faded each day, was becoming a shadow in her own home. It was then that something began to change. Robert, without warning, decided to hire someone to help with Sophia. He realized, albeit belatedly, that his daughter needed more attention than he and Marcella could offer. Teresa was essential, but she already had too many responsibilities. He needed someone specialized, someone who could dedicate themselves entirely to the girl. Marcella didn't like the idea. She questioned the necessity, said it was a waste of money. But Robert was firm. For the first time in months, he asserted his will. Marcella backed down, but her face betrayed her irritation. Robert contacted a specialized agency for child caregivers. He explained the situation. A 6-year-old girl, shy, who had lost her mother 3 years ago and needed someone patient, caring and capable of understanding childhood trauma. The agency sent several profiles. Robert reviewed them all carefully. And then he found Julia's. Julia Moore was 28 years old. She had a degree in education with a specialization in child psychology. She had experience with children who had gone through loss, trauma, and emotional difficulties. Her resume was impeccable. But what caught Robert's attention was her cover letter. Julia had written with sincerity about her motivation. She believed that every child deserved to be seen, heard, and loved. She believed that healing was possible. She believed that childhood should not be a place of loneliness. Robert scheduled an interview. Julia arrived at the house on a Thursday afternoon, dressed simply but elegantly. Jeans, a white blouse, comfortable sneakers. She had curly brown hair tied in a loose bun, honey-colored eyes, and a genuine smile. Robert received her in the living room. They talked for almost an hour. Julia asked questions about Sophia, about the household routine, about his expectations. Robert was honest. He said his daughter was going through a difficult time, that he couldn't be as present as he wanted to be, that he needed someone who truly cared. Julia listened attentively, and then she said something that stuck in Robert's mind. "Mr. Miller, I'm not just here to do a job. I'm here because I believe I can make a difference in Sophia's life. But I need you to understand something. Children don't need perfection. They need presence, they need truth, they need someone who is willing to truly see them. Robert felt something shift inside him, a pang of guilt perhaps, or hope. He hired Julia on the spot. Marcella, when she found out, pretended to agree, but inside she was furious. Another person in the house, someone else to witness, to have an opinion, to get in the way. She knew she had to be careful. Julia wasn't like Teresa. Julia had training. Julia had a trained eye. Julia would be a problem. The next day, Julia started. She arrived early in the morning and was greeted by Teresa, who immediately took a liking to her. The two chatted while preparing breakfast. Teresa, relieved, finally had an ally. When Sophia came downstairs, still in her pajamas, holding her teddy bear, she stopped halfway down the stairs upon seeing a stranger in the kitchen. Julia smiled and introduced herself in a soft voice. "Hi, Sophia. My name is Julia. Your dad hired me to be with you. We're going to spend some time together, okay?" Sophia didn't answer. She just looked at Julia with suspicion. She was used to disappointment. She was used to people who pretended to care. Julia didn't push. She didn't try to hug her, didn't invade the girl's space. She just kept smiling naturally and asked if Sophia liked pancakes. Sophia hesitated. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded yes. Julia made pancakes. She added fruit, honey, a touch of cinnamon. She sat at the table next to Sophia and ate too. She didn't ask invasive questions. She didn't try to force conversation. She was just there, present, calm. And so began a new chapter in the life of that house, a chapter that would bring hidden truths to light, challenge established structures, and slowly begin to give back to Sophia something she had lost a long time ago: hope. The first few days with Julia in the house were like watching a delicate dance, full of cautious steps and calculated movements. Sophia didn't trust her. She had already learned at only 6 years old that adults could change their behavior when no one was looking, that smiles weren't always sincere, that kind words could hide cold intentions. She had learned this in the most painful way possible, by watching how Marcella transformed completely when Robert left the house. So Sophia kept her distance, observing Julia's every gesture with those large, attentive eyes, waiting for the moment the mask would fall, when the kindness would turn into impatience or indifference. But that moment never came. And that in itself was disconcerting. Julia had a patience that seemed infinite, as if she had all the time in the world to wait for Sophia to open up. She didn't force closeness. She didn't invade the girl's personal space. She didn't attempt forced hugs or artificial conversations filled with questions about feelings. She was simply present, like a silent anchor in the midst of the emotional storm Sophia was living through. She would sit on the floor of the playroom while Sophia drew in silence, and she would just be there, reading a book or watching the garden through the window, letting the girl decide when and if she wanted to interact. When Sophia finished a drawing, Julia would ask in a soft voice if she could see it. If Sophia shook her head no, Julia would just smile and say that was okay, that whenever she wanted to show it, she would be there to look with all the attention the drawing deserved. This respect for the girl's boundaries, for her autonomy, for her need to control the pace of things was something new. It was something Sophia had never experienced before, especially after Marcella entered her life. In the mornings, Julia would wake up early, around 6 o'clock, and go down to the kitchen where she would find Teresa already preparing breakfast. The two had developed an immediate, almost telepathic connection. Teresa, who had for so long carried the burden of trying to protect Sophia alone, who spent sleepless nights worrying about what the girl was feeling but unable to do more than small gestures of affection, finally had an ally. Someone who understood, someone who could read between the lines, someone prepared to truly help Sophia. They would talk quietly in the kitchen while making pancakes, scrambling eggs, cutting fresh fruit bought at the local farmer's market, and preparing freshly squeezed orange juice. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the house, bringing a sense of comfort that had long been absent from those rooms. Julia asked questions about Sophia with genuine interest, taking mental notes of every detail. What was she like before Beatrice passed away? What did she like to do? What were her favorite games? When exactly did she start to become so quiet, so withdrawn? Teresa told her everything in a choked voice, pausing now and then to wipe away the tears that insisted on falling. She talked about Beatrice, about how Sophia was a child full of life until she was 3, how she would laugh out loud, run through the house, make up stories, and sing the songs her mother taught her. She talked about how everything changed after Beatrice was gone, how Sophia slowly closed herself off, how the light in her eyes faded day by day. And she talked with even more sadness about how Marcella's arrival made things even worse. Julia listened with total attention, asking more questions when necessary, slowly piecing together the complex puzzle of the little girl's story. She knew that understanding the past was essential to helping Sophia build a better future. When Sophia came down for breakfast, always around 7:30, after having dressed herself in clothes she carefully chose, she would always find the table set with care. Julia had discovered, through discreet conversations with Teresa and careful observation, that Sophia liked freshly squeezed orange juice, not the carton kind Marcella insisted on buying, but the kind made on the spot with fresh oranges. She had discovered that the girl preferred bread with strawberry jam over anything else, that she didn't like scrambled eggs, but loved hard-boiled eggs cut into slices, that she liked it when her fruit was cut into different shapes: stars, hearts, crescent moons. These were small details, things that seemed insignificant but in fact made all the difference. They showed that someone was paying attention, that someone cared about what she liked, about what made her happy. Sophia would sit at the table, always in the same spot, always holding her teddy bear in her lap, and eat slowly, looking at her plate as if studying each bite before bringing it to her mouth. Julia would sit beside her, never across from her, so as not to seem like she was watching, and talk about simple, uncomplicated, safe things. She talked about the weather, whether it was sunny or cloudy, if it looked like it was going to rain. She talked about the birds that appeared in the garden, the cardinals with their distinctive song, the hummingbirds that came to drink nectar from the flowers. She talked about a cartoon she had watched as a child, back in the 2000s, when TV still showed programs she loved. She told stories about her own childhood, about when she learned to ride a bike and fell so many times. Her mom almost forbade her from trying again. Light, funny stories that made Sophia offer small, almost imperceptible smiles, but they were there. Julia didn't ask invasive questions. She didn't ask how Sophia was feeling, if she was sad, if she missed her mother. She knew that these questions, however well-intentioned, could make the girl shut down even more. She didn't demand answers. She didn't require Sophia to participate in the conversations. She just created an environment where Sophia could, if she wanted, when she felt ready, begin to open up. And slowly, very slowly, that started to happen. Sophia began to make small comments. She would point to a bird and say it was pretty. She would say she liked the juice. She would ask if Julia had ever seen a certain cartoon. They were brief interactions, but they were interactions, and for Julia and Teresa, that was cause for silent celebration. Marcella watched all of this with growing irritation. She didn't like Julia. She didn't like the way the young woman seemed to have brought a lightness to the house, how Teresa smiled more, how even Sophia, so withdrawn, was starting to show small signs of change. Marcella felt like she was losing control. For all those months, she had maintained a rigid structure, an environment where things worked her way. And now this caregiver, with her gentle methods, was messing everything up. But Marcella was smart. She knew she couldn't openly show her dissatisfaction. Robert had hired Julia, and he seemed pleased with the choice. So Marcella adopted a different strategy. She became subtle. She made indirect comments, little jabs disguised as concern. "Julia, don't you think you're spoiling Sophia too much? Children need boundaries, not just affection. Julia, Sophia is spending too much time indoors. Wouldn't it be better to take her to some outdoor activities? Julia, I've noticed you let Sophia choose what she wants to eat. That could create bad eating habits." Julia listened to it all calmly, always responding politely but firmly. She explained that Sophia was in a process of rebuilding trust, that it was necessary to go slowly, that forcing rigid boundaries at that moment could be harmful. Marcella would pretend to agree, but inside she was seething. Who was this young woman to give her lessons on how to raise a child? Marcella didn't have children, true, but she knew enough about discipline, about keeping up appearances, about making things work the right way. Robert remained absent most of the time. He left early for the office and came back late, often after Sophia was already asleep. On weekends, there was always some social event, some unavoidable commitment. Julia tried a few times to talk to him about the importance of a father's presence. She said that Sophia needed her dad, that she missed him, that the emotional distance was affecting the girl. Robert would listen, agree, and promise he would change. But in practice, nothing changed. He was stuck in a vicious cycle. He worked to escape his feelings, and the more he worked, the more distant he became from everything that truly mattered. 2 weeks passed. Sophia began to show small changes. She was still quiet, still withdrawn, but now, every once in a while, she would smile. A small, shy, almost imperceptible smile, but for Julia, it was a huge victory. One morning, while they were having breakfast, Sophia picked up a piece of pancake and, for the first time, offered it to Julia. "Do you want some?" Her voice was low, hesitant. Julia felt her eyes well up with tears, but she held back her emotion. She accepted the piece of pancake with a genuine smile and said it was delicious. Sophia looked down, but the corners of her mouth held the hint of a smile. Another day, while Julia was reading a children's book in the living room, Sophia approached slowly and sat next to her. She didn't say anything. She just sat there listening to the story. Julia continued reading naturally, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. When she finished the story, Sophia took another book from the shelf and handed it to Julia. "This one, too?" Julia nodded yes and began to read. Sophia rested her head on Julia's arm, still holding her teddy bear. It was a moment of pure connection, silent, but profoundly significant. Teresa, watching from a distance, had to turn away to hide her tears. It had been so long since she had seen Sophia relaxed, since she had seen the girl spontaneously seek physical contact with someone. It seemed that finally something was beginning to heal in that child. But not everything was peaceful. Marcella noticed the growing bond between Sophia and Julia, and it bothered her deeply. She began to create situations to undermine Julia's authority. She would change the rules without warning, overrule decisions Julia made, and make a point of reminding her that she, Marcella, was Robert's wife, and therefore the one really in charge. Julia tried to handle it all with professionalism, but it was getting harder and harder. She knew she was treading on mined territory, that Marcella saw her as a threat. One afternoon, while Julia was playing with Sophia in the garden, teaching the girl how to plant daisies in a small flower bed they had prepared together, Marcella appeared with a stern expression. "Julia, I need to talk to you." Julia asked Sophia to continue planting and stepped away. Marcella crossed her arms and got straight to the point. "I don't think it's appropriate for you to spend so much time with Sophia. She's getting too attached to you, and that's not healthy. A child needs independence, not a substitute mother figure." Julia took a deep breath before answering. "With all due respect, Marcella, Sophia isn't getting attached in a harmful way. She is, for the first time in a long time, feeling safe enough to trust someone. This is part of the healing process, and I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just offering the emotional support she needs right now." Marcella narrowed her eyes. "You were hired to be a caregiver, not a psychologist. I suggest you remember that." Julia remained calm, but inside she felt the tension rising. "I have a degree in education with a specialization in child psychology. I know exactly what I'm doing, and everything I do is for Sophia's well-being." Marcella gave a cold smile. "We'll see if Robert agrees with that." And she walked away, leaving Julia alone in the garden with a knot in her stomach. That night, Marcella waited for Robert to arrive. She was determined to plant doubts about Julia. When he entered the bedroom, tired as always, Marcella started the conversation in a seemingly casual way. "Honey, don't you think Julia is overstepping with Sophia? I've noticed she's creating an emotional dependency in the girl. That could be harmful in the future." Robert, who was barely paying attention, mumbled something about trusting Julia's professionalism. Marcella insisted, changing her approach. "I'm just worried about Sophia. I don't want her to suffer any more than she already has. And I'm afraid that when Julia eventually leaves, the girl will feel abandoned all over again." Robert finally looked at his wife. "You're right to be concerned, but Julia seems to be doing a good job. Sophia is better than I've seen her in months." Marcella forced a smile. "Maybe, but I think we need to set some boundaries. We can't let an employee have so much influence over our daughter." "Our daughter." The words came easily from Marcella's mouth, but they sounded false. Robert didn't notice. He was too tired to analyze nuances. He nodded that he would talk to Julia about setting boundaries, but deep down he didn't think it was necessary. Marcella, however, felt she had planted the seed of doubt. Now she just had to wait. The days went on. Sophia and Julia spent their afternoons together. They went to the park, fed the ducks at the pond, and drew with sidewalk chalk. Sophia started talking a little more. She would share small things, like her teacher's name at school, the picture she had drawn in art class. Julia listened with genuine attention, asking questions, encouraging her. Slowly, Sophia began to mention her mother. She talked about fragmented memories, about Beatrice's scent, about the song she used to sing before bed. Julia never interrupted. She let Sophia speak at her own pace, process her emotions, and honor her mother's memory. It was delicate, sensitive work that required patience and love, and Julia had both in abundance. Teresa noticed everything and was moved. One evening, while they were preparing dinner together, she held Julia's hand and said in a choked voice, "You're saving that little girl. I tried for so long, but I couldn't do it alone. You've brought light into this house." Julia squeezed Teresa's hand back. "We're doing this together, and there's still a lot of work to do." But what neither of them knew was that the storm was just beginning. Marcella was not willing to accept defeat. She had spent too much time building her position in that house to let a caregiver threaten it. She began to plot. She thought of ways to discredit Julia, to make Robert doubt her, to create situations that would put the caregiver in a difficult position. Marcella was patient. She knew how to wait for the right moment. And that moment came on a Monday morning. Robert had left for a business trip to Boston and would be gone for 3 days. Julia was in the room with Sophia, helping the girl choose clothes for school. That's when Marcella walked in without knocking, a hard expression on her face. "Julia, I need you to take Sophia to school and then go downtown to pick up some documents for me from an office. The appointment is at 10 o'clock. Julia hesitated. "Marcella, I was hired to take care of Sophia, not to run personal errands." Marcella raised an eyebrow. "You work in this house, and while my husband is away, I'm in charge, unless you have a problem with following instructions?" Julia saw the trap. If she refused, she would be seen as insubordinate. If she accepted, she would be validating Marcella's authority to divert her from her duties. She took a deep breath. "All right, but I need to be back to pick Sophia up from school." Marcella smiled, satisfied. "Of course. Be back by 3. Julia took Sophia to school, chatting with her on the way, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. Then she went downtown, picked up the documents Marcella had mentioned, documents that Julia suspected weren't that urgent at all. It was just a power play. Julia returned to the house around 2 o'clock, put the documents away and got ready to pick up Sophia. But as she was leaving, Marcella intercepted her again. "Julia, change of plans. I'll pick Sophia up today. You can take the afternoon off." Julia felt a tightness in her chest. "Marcella, I'd rather go. Sophia is used to me." Marcella gave a cold smile. "I'm her stepmother. I'm perfectly capable of picking her up from school. Or do you think I'm not?" Julia was cornered. She couldn't argue without seeming to question Marcella's role in Sophia's life. Reluctantly, she agreed. She spent the afternoon at the house, restless, waiting. She checked the clock every 5 minutes. At 3, school let out. By 3:15, Marcella should have been arriving with Sophia, but 3:15 passed. 3:30, 4 o'clock. Julia was starting to get desperate. Finally, at 4:20, the car pulled into the driveway. Julia ran to the door. Sophia got out of the car with red eyes. She had clearly been crying. Marcella got out with an expression of false concern. Sophia had a tough day at school. She got into a fight with a classmate. We need to have a talk about her behavior. Julia knelt down to Sophia's level. What happened, sweetie? Sophia just shook her head and ran inside, heading straight for her room. Julia looked at Marcella, suspicious. What really happened? Marcella shrugged. I already told you. She got into a fight at school. Sometimes kids are difficult. And she walked away, leaving Julia alone. Julia went up to Sophia's room. She found the girl curled up on the bed, hugging her teddy bear, crying softly. Julia sat beside her and stroked her hair. Sophia, can you tell me what happened? Sophia sobbed. She said I didn't have a mommy. She said my mommy left me because I was annoying. And when the teacher asked what happened, she said it was my fault. Julia felt anger rise within her. Who said that? Your classmate or Marcella? Sophia looked at Julia with frightened eyes. Aunt Marcella said I shouldn't cry over every little thing, that I needed to learn to be strong. She said my mommy would be disappointed to see me crying. Julia hugged Sophia tightly. That's not true, Sophia. Your mommy loved you so much, and it's okay to cry. When you're sad, there's nothing wrong with you. Sophia clung to Julia as if she were drowning, and Julia was her only lifeline. They stayed like that for a long time. When Sophia finally fell asleep, exhausted from crying, Julia went downstairs to confront Marcella. She found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, as calm as if nothing had happened. Marcella, we need to talk. What did you say to Sophia on the way home from school? Marcella looked up, feigning innocence. I just tried to talk to her about her behavior. Why? Julia clenched her fists, trying to stay calm. You said things that hurt her deeply, things about her mother. That is unacceptable. Marcella stood up, taking a defensive stance. Who do you think you are to tell me what's acceptable or not? I am Robert's wife. I have more authority in this house than you ever will. Julia took a deep breath. I was hired to look after Sophia's emotional well-being, and I'm going to do exactly that, even if it means confronting you. Marcella took a step forward, her face red with anger. You'll regret saying that. I'll make sure Robert fires you. Julia held her gaze. Do what you feel you must, but as long as I'm here, I will protect that little girl. The two women stared at each other in silence, the tension filling the air like static electricity. Finally, Marcella turned and walked away, stomping up the stairs. Julia was left alone in the living room, her heart pounding. She knew she had just made a powerful enemy, but she didn't regret it. Sophia needed her, and Julia wasn't about to give up. That night, after making sure Sophia was sound asleep, Julia went down to the kitchen where she found Teresa drinking chamomile tea. The older housekeeper looked at Julia and immediately knew something had happened. Sit down, my dear, she said, pulling out a chair. Julia sat down and told her everything. She told her about the confrontation with Marcella, about the horrible things that had been said to Sophia, about the threat of being fired. Teresa listened, shaking her head with a mixture of anger and resignation. I knew this was going to happen, Teresa said with a tired sigh. Marcella can't stand it when someone gets close to Sophia. She sees the girl as an obstacle, a reminder of Robert's past that she wishes she could erase. And now that you're here making the girl smile again, she feels threatened. Julia clutched the cup of tea Teresa had placed in front of her. But why? What does she gain from this? Why treat a child with such coldness? Teresa was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then she spoke in a low voice. Marcella didn't marry Robert for love. She married him for position, for money, for status. She wanted the life he could offer, not the man himself. And Sophia is a complication in the perfect equation she's built. A sad, traumatized child doesn't fit the image of the flawless family Marcella tries to sell on social media, at social events. Julia felt a wave of nausea. But doesn't Robert see that? Teresa gave a sad smile. Robert is blind, dear. He's so lost in his own pain, so drowned in work, that he can't see what's happening right under his nose. I've tried to talk to him a few times, but he always thinks I'm exaggerating. that Marcella is just having a hard time adjusting, that things will get better with time. But they don't. They only get worse. Julia took a deep breath. Then I need to find a way to make him see, to make him understand what's happening to his daughter. Teresa took Julia's hand and squeezed it tightly. Be careful. Marcella is clever. She knows how to manipulate situations. If you confront Robert now, she'll turn it all against you. She'll make it seem like you're causing trouble, that you're trying to drive a wedge in the family. You need proof, concrete evidence. Julia nodded slowly. You're right, I need to be smart about this. The two continued talking late into the night, planning, thinking of strategies. Julia decided she would start keeping a detailed journal of everything she observed, Sophia's behavioral changes, the things Marcella said and did. She needed to document everything clearly and objectively so that when the time came to talk to Robert, she would have more than just words. The following days were tense. Marcella practically ignored Julia, passing her in the hallways without even a glance. But Julia knew it was the calm before the storm. Marcella was planning something, she could feel it, and she was right. 2 days after their confrontation, Robert called from Boston. Marcella answered and, in a worried, tearful voice, began to tell her version of the story. She said Julia was being disrespectful, that she wasn't following instructions, that she was trying to position herself as a mother figure to Sophia, pushing the girl away from her. She painted a picture where she was the victim, the dedicated stepmother who was just trying her best, but was being sabotaged by an arrogant caregiver. Robert, tired and stressed from problems with the project in Boston, didn't question Marcella's version. He said he would have. A serious talk with Julia when he got back, that perhaps they needed to reconsider her employment. Marcella hung up the phone with a triumphant smile. Finally, things were coming back under her control. But what she didn't know was that Julia and Teresa were already prepared. They were already documenting everything, and the truth, sooner or later, always comes out. Robert returned from Boston on Friday night around 10, bringing with him the accumulated exhaustion of 3 intense days of grueling meetings and negotiations that seemed endless. The project in the Seaport district was facing serious problems, delays that could cost not only millions in contractual penalties, but also the reputation he had built over 2 decades of hard work. Suppliers were missing deadlines, leaving him without essential materials. Key engineers were quitting mid-project, taking crucial structural knowledge with them, and soil issues required a complete redesign of an entire floor's foundation. It was a logistical and financial nightmare that was draining every ounce of his energy. Robert had spent countless hours on the phone, intense meetings that stretched into the early morning, trying to put out fires on all fronts, negotiate extensions with impatient clients, and calm, nervous investors who were threatening to pool their capital. Every conversation was a battle, every decision weighed like lead. He was at the end of his rope, running on autopilot, sustained only by strong coffee and willpower. He arrived home with a throbbing headache, wanting nothing more than a hot shower and 12 straight hours of sleep. But Marcella was waiting for him in the living room, already in an expensive silk robe, a look of carefully rehearsed concern on her face. "Honey, we need to talk about Julia," she said, before he could even take off his jacket. Robert sighed, dropped his briefcase on the floor and sank onto the sofa, running his hands over his unshaven face. Marcella sat beside him. "I really didn't want to have to say this, but it's becoming unbearable. Julia is crossing every line. She doesn't respect my authority. She questions my decisions, and she's creating an unhealthy dependency in Sophia. It's like she's trying to replace me." Robert looked at her with tired, bloodshot eyes, just wanting to end the conversation and go to sleep. "Marcella, we've been over this more than once. Julia is doing a good job. You yourself said, I hired her because Sophia needed it. And look, Sophia is better than she's been in months. She's smiling again, drawing again, eating better. I can't just fire someone who is helping my daughter." Marcella shook her head with perfectly calculated sadness, like an award-winning actress playing the role of a lifetime. "You don't see what happens when you're not here, Robert. You're gone for days, traveling, working late. You don't see the daily routine of the house. Julia practically ignores me when you're not around. When I give Sophia any instruction about homework time, about her meals, about anything, she interferes, right in front of me, undermining my decisions in front of the girl. How am I supposed to build a bond with your daughter if someone is sabotaging my every attempt? It's completely destroying any chance I have of becoming a mother figure to her. I'm seriously starting to wonder if Julia isn't doing this on purpose, if she doesn't have ulterior motives here. Robert felt a flash of irritation, but was too tired to develop the thought. What kind of ulterior motives could she have? Marcella shrugged with a heavy sigh. I don't know, maybe she wants to make herself indispensable. Maybe she's trying to occupy a space in this family that isn't hers. Some women do that, Robert. They take advantage of vulnerable situations, of widowers with children, to infiltrate families. Robert fell silent, too exhausted to think clearly. Marcella sensed his hesitation and pressed further. I know you trust her, but sometimes trust is misplaced. I think you should have a serious talk with her. Make it clear what her role is in this house, or maybe consider replacing her with someone more flexible. Robert nodded vaguely. I'll talk to her, but right now I need to sleep. Marcella smiled, satisfied. But that night in the room next door, while Robert and Marcella slept on their respective sides of the bed, not touching, Sophia was having a terrible nightmare. In the dream, she was in a dark, cold place where the walls were closing in, trapping her. She heard distant voices, harsh words, criticisms that echoed relentlessly. She ran, trying to find a way out, but all the doors were locked. Suddenly she woke up screaming, her body drenched in sweat, her heart racing, trembling from head to toe as if she had just escaped real danger. Julia, who was sleeping in the guest room down the hall and always kept her door ajar to hear if Sophia needed anything, heard the scream cut through the silent night. She jumped out of bed immediately, not even bothering with slippers, and ran down the hall to the girls' room. She opened the door carefully and turned on the dim bedside lamp. She found Sophia huddled on the bed, wrapped in her sheets, crying convulsively, clutching her teddy bear so tightly that her small knuckles were white. Julia sat on the bed and pulled Sophia into her lap, rocking her gently. It's okay, sweetie. It was just a dream. You're safe, I'm here. Sophia clung to Julia, sobbing. She was here. She said mean things again. She said I shouldn't like you. Who said that, Sophia? Aunt Marcella. In my dream. But it felt real. Julia hugged Sophia tightly, feeling anger build inside her. She stayed with the girl until she fell asleep again, singing softly. When she returned to her own room, it was already 3 a.m. She couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how this situation was becoming unsustainable. On Saturday morning, Robert came downstairs late and found Julia preparing breakfast alone. Teresa had the weekend off. Julia, can we talk? Robert asked, his formal tone indicating it wouldn't be pleasant. Julia followed him into his office. Robert closed the door and stood with his arms crossed. Julia, Marcella spoke to me. She said you're having trouble respecting the hierarchy of the house, that you're interfering with her relationship with Sophia. Julia took a deep breath. Mr. Miller, with all due respect, Marcella's version isn't the whole truth. I'm not interfering. I'm protecting Sophia from situations that are harming her emotional development. Robert grew irritated. Are you implying that my wife is mistreating my daughter? I'm not using that word, but I am saying there's a coldness, a lack of empathy that is affecting Sophia, and that's not just my opinion. It's something I observe every day. Robert took a step forward. Julia, you were hired to be a caregiver, not to judge my family. If you can't work in harmony with my wife, then maybe it's best we terminate this contract. Julia felt the floor drop out from under her. Please, Mr. Miller, this isn't about me. It's about Sophia. I'm begging you to pay more attention to her, to watch how she behaves when Marcella is around, to really talk to her. Robert shook his head. I'll think about what you've said. But for now, I need you to respect Marcella. She is my wife. She deserves respect in this house. Julia left the office, defeated. Marcella had been listening from the other side of the door, satisfied. That afternoon, Robert decided to take Sophia for ice cream, just the two of them. They left, leaving Marcella and Julia at home. During the outing, Sophia was cheerful, For the first time in weeks, Robert really talked to her. He asked about school, about what she liked to do. Sophia, still shy, answered with more openness. Robert realized how much he had distanced himself from his daughter. He felt a wave of guilt. When they returned home, Sophia was happy. That night after dinner, Robert went up to her room to say goodnight. He found her drawing. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Sophia showed him the picture. It was a house with open windows, flowers in the garden, and a bright sun. There were 3 figures, a large one that was Robert, a small one that was Sophia, and a medium-sized one with curly hair that was Julia. "You like Julia, don't you?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "She's nice, Dad. She really plays with me. She listens when I talk. She lets me talk about Mommy without getting mad." Robert felt something profound shift inside him, as if a veil was being lifted from his eyes for the first time in a long time. Suddenly, small details he had ignored started to make sense. The times Sophia would shrink when Marcella entered the room, the way the girl avoided asking questions when her stepmother was around, how she would run to her room as soon as she heard Marcella's car pull up. "And Marcella? Do you like Marcella?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost afraid of the answer. Sophia went completely silent, as if someone had hit a pause button. The smile that had lit up her face seconds before vanished instantly, replaced by an expression of fear and sadness. She lowered her eyes to the drawing in her hands, her fingers nervously gripping the edges of the paper. She didn't answer. She just stood there, petrified, as if the mere mention of Marcella's name froze her. Robert felt a painful ache in his heart. He pressed on, but this time with even more gentleness, placing his large hand on his daughter's small shoulder. "You can tell me, Sophia. You can tell me the truth. Daddy promises he won't be mad at you. No matter what you say, Daddy just wants to understand what you're really feeling, without fear, without lies." Sophia remained silent for a few more seconds that felt like an eternity. Then, in a very low voice, so low that Robert had to lean in to hear, almost a whisper, heavy with pain and fear, she finally said, "She doesn't like me, Dad. I know it. I can feel it. She pretends when you're home. She smiles and talks nicely in front of you. She strokes my hair, asks if I'm okay. But when you leave for work or go on a trip, she's different. Her face gets angry. Her eyes get cold. She says I'm annoying, that I do everything wrong, that I get in her way, that I'm too loud when I play or too quiet when I don't talk, that nothing I do is ever right. She said—" Sophia hesitated, tears beginning to well up in her brown eyes and stream down her cheeks. "She said my mommy wouldn't like to see me crying so much, that my mommy would be disappointed in me for being so weak, such a crybaby, that I need to be strong and stop being a baby, stop living in the past, but I can't, Dad. I can't forget. I still miss Mommy so much. I miss her smell, her voice singing to me, the way she hugged me. And now I'm scared of Aunt Marcella too. Scared of doing something wrong and making her mad. Scared of talking and having her criticize me. Scared of crying and having her call me weak. I'm scared all the time, Dad." Tears streamed down Sophia's face. Robert felt his heart break. How had he not seen it? How had he let things get to this point? "I'm sorry, my flower, I'm so sorry. Daddy didn't know, but I promise I'm going to fix this. I promise you will never be scared here again." Sophia clung to her father. Robert held her, feeling the weight of his own negligence. When Sophia fell asleep, he went downstairs, determined. He found Marcella in the living room, scrolling on her phone. "Marcella, we need to talk seriously." "About what?" she asked without looking up. "About Sophia. About what you've been saying to her." Marcella turned pale but quickly composed herself. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sophia told me. She told me about the things you say when I'm not here, about how you treat her." Marcella stood up, indignant. "You're going to believe a 6-year-old? She's probably making things up, Robert. Kids do that when they want attention." Robert shook his head. "No, I know when. My daughter is lying." And she wasn't. She was terrified, hurt. Do you know what that means? It means my daughter is afraid of you. Afraid in her own home. Marcella switched tactics, her voice turning tearful. "Robert, I try. I swear I try." But it's hard to bond with a child who has rejected me from day one. She sees me as the enemy, and Julia only makes things worse, turning Sophia against me." Robert took a deep breath. "Marcella, I married you thinking you could be a good mother figure for Sophia, but this isn't working, and I will not let my daughter suffer." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to change, you need to really try, or our relationship has no future." "Are you threatening me?" Robert shook his head. "It's not a threat, it's reality. My daughter comes first, always." The next day, Robert had to work from his home office. While he was focused on spreadsheets, he heard voices coming from the living room. He approached silently and saw Marcella talking to a friend who had come to visit. "I can't stand that girl anymore," Marcella was saying in frustration. "She's so annoying, always crying, always with that ridiculous teddy bear. And now Robert is starting to question everything because of her. I didn't get married to be a nanny to a traumatized kid." Her friend laughed. "Why don't you just send her to boarding school?" Marcella sighed. "I've thought about it, but Robert would never agree. He's too attached to the idea of being a good father, even if in practice he doesn't give a damn." Robert felt rage boil inside him. So that was it. Marcella had never cared about Sophia. It was all an act. He walked into the room, abruptly. The two women froze, startled. "The visit is over," Robert said in a controlled but firm voice. The friend left quickly. Marcella tried to justify herself, but Robert held up a hand. "I don't want to hear it. It's over, Marcella. I want you out of my house." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You lied to me. You manipulated the situation. You treated my daughter with coldness and contempt. I don't want you here." Marcella tried to argue, tried to cry tears that wouldn't come, tried to plead in a voice that sounded false even to her. "Robert, please, you can't do this. We're married. We're a family. I know I made mistakes. I know I wasn't the best stepmother, but I can change. Let me try again. Give me one more chance." But Robert was more resolute than he had ever been in his life. The mask had fallen. He now saw with absolute clarity who Marcella really was. There was no more room for doubt or second chances. He called a lawyer that same night, waking the man in the middle of the night, explaining the situation with a firm and determined voice. He initiated the separation proceedings immediately, demanding they be expedited. Marcella was forced to leave the house that very day, before the sun had fully risen. She packed her bags in a hurry, throwing expensive clothes into designer suitcases, breaking the heels of her shoes in her haste, smudging her makeup with angry tears mixed with mascara. She took only her clothes, shoes, bags, jewelry, and personal belongings. Nothing else. Robert made it clear she had no claim to anything in that house, none of the assets built long before she appeared. Before leaving for the last time, standing at the front, with two enormous suitcases at her feet, Marcella looked at Robert with a pure, distilled hatred in her eyes, a hatred that twisted her beautiful face into something ugly and distorted. "You're going to regret this, Robert Miller. You're going to regret this big time. You think you can humiliate me like this and there won't be consequences? You have no idea who you're messing with. I will destroy your reputation. I'll tell everyone what kind of man you really are. No one will want to do business with you when I'm done." Robert didn't answer. He just watched her leave, hail a cab, struggle with her bags, and disappear down the still dark street. When the car finally vanished from sight, he closed the heavy door, leaned his back against it, and took a deep breath. He felt a strange, intense mix of profound relief and melancholic sadness. His second marriage had failed even more spectacularly than he could have imagined. But this time, unlike everything he had done before, he was not willing to sacrifice his daughter's happiness for social convenience, for fear of loneliness or for the pressure of what others might think. Sophia came first. She always should have. He went up to Sophia's room and found Julia reading to the girl. "Marcella is gone. She won't bother you anymore, Sophia." Sophia looked at her father with wide eyes. "For real?" Robert nodded. "For real. And I promise that from now on I'll be here more. I'll be the dad you deserve." Sophia ran to him and hugged him tightly. Julia watched, moved. In the following weeks, the atmosphere of the house changed completely, as if someone had thrown open all the windows and let in fresh air after years of suffocation. Robert drastically reduced his business trips, learning to delegate more responsibility to his partners and trusted managers at the firm. He realized he had built a competent team that could run projects without his constant presence. He started coming home earlier, around 6 in the evening, something he hadn't done in years. He had dinner with Sophia at the table every night, with no phone, no laptop, no distractions. Just talking, listening to her stories about school, about the pictures she drew, about the dreams she had. He helped with her homework, something he had never done before, sitting beside her at the kitchen table, being patient when she didn't understand a math problem, praising every small success. He played with her in the yard on Saturday afternoons, pushing her on the swing he had installed himself, throwing a ball, teaching her to ride her bike without training wheels. He started actively participating in her school's art classes, the amateur plays her class put on, and the parent-teacher conferences where he used to send Teresa or simply not show up. Sophia blossomed with each passing day, like a plant finally receiving the right amount of water and sunlight after nearly dying of thirst in the shade. She laughed more, laughed out loud without fear of bothering anyone. She talked more, told stories, asked questions without hesitation. She played more, ran through the house, sang in the shower, danced in the living room. The dark circles under her eyes disappeared. The light returned to her eyes, her smile became permanent. She was a child again. Julia officially continued to work as a caregiver, but now with much more peace and joy in her heart. Without Marcella's constantly tense presence, without having to be on high alert to protect Sophia, without the daily confrontations, the house became a truly welcoming place where she felt like part of the family and not just an employee. Teresa returned from her weekend off refreshed, with a huge smile on her face when she saw Marcella was gone. She was overjoyed to see the transformation of the house and of the little girl she had helped raise since she was a baby. The three of them, Julia, Teresa, and Sophia, spent entire afternoons planting more flowers in the garden that was once decorative but lifeless, baking homemade cookies in the kitchen that filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla, and painting pictures with poster paint that they proudly hung on the walls. The house gained color, the smell of food made with love, and the sound of laughter. Robert began to notice something different happening inside him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He started to notice how his heart would inexplicably race when he saw Julia smile while playing with Sophia, how he would find silly excuses to be near her, offering to help carry light things, asking her opinion on matters he already knew the answer to, how he deeply admired her dedication, her infinite patience, the genuine kindness that overflowed from her every gesture, every word, how she could turn simple moments into something special just by being there. Julia also felt something changing within her, something that scared her a little. The admiration for the man who had the courage to make the hardest choice, who put his daughter first even if it meant being alone again, who owned his mistakes and worked hard to fix them, was turning into something deeper, more intense. She found herself thinking about him during the day, found herself waiting for the moment he would come home, found herself watching the way he interacted with Sophia, with a tenderness that made her melt inside. The two of them had been dancing around these feelings for weeks, without the courage to speak, afraid of ruining the dynamic that worked so well, afraid of hurting Sophia if things didn't work out. Until one night everything changed. One evening, after putting Sophia to bed, Robert found Julia on the porch, looking at the stars. He sat beside her in silence. After a few minutes he spoke. "Julia, I wanted to thank you for everything, for seeing what I couldn't see, for protecting Sophia when I failed to do so." Julia smiled. "You didn't fail, Robert. You were lost, but you found your way back." He looked at her. "And I realized something else. I realized you're not just Sophia's caregiver. You've become an essential part of our family, and I don't want that to change." Julia's heart sped up. "What are you saying?" Robert took her hand. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, with the woman you are, with the way you love my daughter, with the light you've brought into this house." Julia felt tears in her eyes. "I've fallen in love with you too, and with Sophia. You both have become my family." Robert pulled her close and kissed her softly. In that moment, under the New York stars, a new story began for that family. Months later, on a spring morning, Robert asked Julia to marry him in the garden where she and Sophia had planted daisies. Sophia stood beside them, holding her teddy bear and beaming. Julia said yes, through tears of joy. The wedding was simple, at the same estate where Robert had married Marcella, but this time with a completely different meaning. Sophia was the flower girl, wearing a dress she had chosen herself with nothing to make her uncomfortable. Teresa was there, crying with joy. When the pastor asked if anyone objected to the union, Sophia raised her hand. Everyone fell silent, worried, but she just said in a loud voice, "I support it." Everyone laughed. After the ceremony, Sophia hugged Julia and whispered, "Are you my real mum now?" Julia knelt down to her level. "Only if you want me to be, sweetie," Sophia smiled. "I want to. But Mommy Beatrice is my mom too." "Can I have two mums?" Julia hugged her tightly. "Of course you can. Mommy Beatrice will always be your mum. She loved you so much, and I love you too." Robert watched it all, his heart overflowing. His life had been a mess, a series of mistakes and bad choices. But there, seeing his daughter happy and the woman he loved by his side, he knew he had finally found the right path. Sophia never had nightmares again. She started playing the piano again, but this time because she wanted to, not out of obligation. Her notes were cheerful, full of life. The house that was once cold and silent, filled with laughter, music and flowers. Robert learned to balance work and family, understanding that success wasn't measured in money alone. Julia continued to care for Sophia, but now as a mother, not an employee. Teresa stayed with the family, happy to see the girl she had helped raise finally be happy. And on a Sunday afternoon, while the three of them were in the garden, Sophia making a daisy chain, Julia reading a book, and Robert grilling at the barbecue, the little girl looked up at the blue sky and whispered, "Thank you, Mommy Beatrice. Thank you for sending Julia to take care of us." A gentle breeze rustled the flowers as if in reply. That family, which had started in pieces, rebuilt itself with love, patience, and courage. And they discovered that sometimes the best stories aren't the ones without hardship, but the ones where people choose not to give up on each other. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Sophia, and Julia has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of rebuilding love and courage, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Was it when Robert finally opened his eyes? When Sophia found safety in Julia's arms? Or when true love triumphed over appearances? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that it's never too late to start over, to make the right choices, and to put love first. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will make you reflect on what truly matters in life.